Hello everyone, and welcome to another intuitive painting, small paintings where I paint using nothing but my intuition, and I encourage you to do the same. Today we're going to paint this kind of moody morning beach scene, and as always I'm using a Frederick's canvas sheet that I've cut and glued to a piece of foam core. I'm going to start with my 1/2 inch flat brush and some cerulean blue mixed with a little bit of burnt sienna and white. The burnt sienna is going to give me a little bit of a different gray color to the raw umber that I used with cerulean in the last video. Just like I was talking about with greens, where, I said grab every blue and every yellow you have and experiment with the greens you can mix. I also encourage you to explore all the different mixtures you can get with blues and browns. Those are another couple of colors that I love to mix. You get some really unique and sometimes really unexpected things. I'm just kind of laying this color in for a sky. I knew I wanted a beach scene. I had a bit of a different idea. This actually turned out different than what I was kind of going for, but I liked this so much better than what I was going for that I just kind of went with it. But at this point, I don't really know anything other than I want a beach scene. I mixed up my color just a little bit lighter there, and I'm loosely blending it into that darker color at the top. Just kind of scumbling it a little. Just mixing up another color that's a little bit lighter, but it's also ever so slightly, it leans more toward the burnt sienna than the previous colors did. So if you notice there, it's just ever so slightly warmer. You could use your cloud brush here if you like. You can use whatever kind of brush you're comfortable with. I hadn't planned on doing much more than that in the sky, but I ended up going back into it. Taking that same mixture and just pulling the horizon down a bit so that I have room to play there. I wasn't sure where I wanted the horizon to be, so I was just giving myself some options. Similar color mixture, just a little bit darker, roughly about the same color as that top color in the sky, the darkest color. And I'm just sketching out a horizon, and then I go over it ever so slightly with just the tip of the brush to soften that line. I don't want a real hard horizon line. As things move away from you, they kind of fade. The lines become less distinct. So by having a real hard horizon line, it makes the horizon seem a lot closer to us than it should be. So I just used a little matte medium there just to soften it a bit. Back into that dark color, even just a little bit darker. And I'm just going to scumble it in there. I did brown it down just a little bit more than the sky so that there was a difference between the sky and the water. Rarely are the sky and the water going to be the exact same color. There's always going to be just a hint of a difference. A little more white as I come forward. Mostly horizontal brush strokes, but I do arc them a little bit. It is an ocean, so there'd be some waves. And to my number 6 bright, that same color, a little bit of white on the tip of my brush that's not blended in. And I'm just playing here. I don't have any real solid plans. I'm just kind of scumbling in some lighter color to find some waves, or just really find how turbulent the ocean is. Breaking up some of those to see if they turn into little waves. I'm really just playing here. just the very tip of the brush, not applying a lot of paint. Any of this can be covered at any moment. There was that darker spot right there in the middle, and so I kind of took that as a shadow of a wave. And I'm going to take some of that white, kind of flick up little bits at the top of that darker spot. It looks really tight right now, but it's just kind of a placeholder. Just dashing it around. It's just, like the name of the game, this, with these little paintings is intuition. And I just wanted to play with that and not worry about how it looked. So that's all I'm doing there. A little bit of matte medium on my 1/2 inch and some white. Mr. Moon says hi. And I'm just dashing some of this white in there to create some clouds. Now the color in my sky is mostly dry, but it's a little bit, ever so slightly wet. It doesn't matter if it's completely wet or completely dry, honestly. Just use a light touch and you can easily blend that paint in there, especially if the colors are similar. You can use a little bit of matte medium to help too, though the matte medium is not really required for this painting, but I feel like it helps me with blending. But see, I'm using a nice light touch. Not taking that white all the way to the horizon either. Back to my little number 6 bright. Some of my brown blue mixture, a little heavier on the side of brown than the previous colors that I've mixed anyway. It's just a nice grayed out color. And I'm going to make sure that that shadow is a shadow. Just darken it a bit. And I'm going to add some of this shadow color to other areas of the water as well. I know that's kind of shocking looking right now, but I feel like it integrated pretty well. Lightening it up just a little bit. There. That was much easier. Just wasn't quite so dark. Creating waves, just like creating clouds, it's all about shadow and highlight. What is darker is going to appear to be in shadow, appear to be underneath something or pressed down, and what is light is going to appear to be higher up or kind of cresting over top of something else. So think about that. Be deliberate with where you put your shadow and light. Don't just go in there and, randomly scrape in some dark and then randomly scrape in some light. I mean, we're all guilty of that. Of course, I've done that. But if you put your shadow and your light next to each other, like right there, I'm kind of putting in some shadow. But if I come back with some white and put a little bit of white along the top of it, the top edge of it, that will help sell the shadow and light relationship. This is my number 8 bright. Just getting some burnt sienna and some Payne's gray. Mix a little bit of white in there. A nice kind of sandy color. I did lean it more heavily toward the burnt sienna than the Payne's gray. But the Payne's gray makes it so that it's not quite such a vibrant color. And I'm just loosely scumbling it into here. Not trying to keep it real separate from that water that I made. Can take it right up to it, blend it into it, take it over top of it. But I'm just kind of putting this color kind of spotty throughout here. Lightening it up a little bit. And continue. That wasn't quite light enough, but I'm going to put it in a few spots anyway. Now I'm going to lighten it up more. Much better. It's blending ever so slightly with that first color. Sometimes I blend it more than other times. And I do ever so slightly make sure that the water and the sand are blended together. But I do work on the water a little bit more, so it doesn't have to be perfect, of course. If there's a spot on the beach where you're like, oh, the water and the sand just do not blend well together here, or this looks weird, just make it a wave. Just put a little wave bit there, little bit of foam on the water, and that'll cover it. Just changing the color there, adding a little bit of that blue to gray it down more. Changing the value. I think sometimes when we think shadow and highlight, we think darker, add more white, or add more of your dark color. But sometimes adding another color from somewhere else in the painting is what is going to give you the most believable shadows. So we kind of talked about that with the last painting as well, where I added a bit of the alizarin into the underside of the cloud. Here I added a little bit of that blue into the sand, and I felt like that gave me some nice, believable shadow in the beach area. Just let those brush strokes show. That's what's going to help sell that it might be a rocky, sandy beach. If you don't want it to be a rocky, sandy beach, then use more of a very similar color range and just blend everything much more smoothly. Mixed up a very light version of that color now, and just with a very light touch, I'm really just using the corner of the brush, just scumbling a hint of that in there as well. Just touches. To my number 6 filbert, I'm getting Payne's Gray. It's that same mixture, but I'm adding a lot more Payne's Gray to it, so it's darker and much grayer. And I'm going to make little dashes. I was really unsure about this part. I'm just kind of experimenting here, knowing that I can cover it up if I really don't like it. And I did like it, but I wanted to just test it and make sure. So here I'm mixing up a lighter color that's a little bit different to make sure that I can integrate it into the sand so those don't just look like weird scumbly bits on top of the sand. And that worked really well. So I'm going back to my dark mixture. Sometimes you got to do a little test spot. And that's what that was. So back into my dark mixture, and now I'm going to do that more sporadically throughout the entire beach area. Just those little dashy marks with the tip of my filbert. Kind of felt like that indicated rocks, or maybe even little bits of wood, just something in the sand kind of poking up. In this little series of paintings that I've done over the last few weeks, this is my shortest painting. This video is just over 20 minutes long, but also I feel like this was probably my favorite. It was very, very simple. It was very, very quick, but I had such a good time with this one, and the mood of it was so perfect for me. So this was definitely my favorite one of the 6. Lightening that color up, and here you'll get to see what I was doing when I was testing it out before in that corner. I want to make sure I can integrate the bottom of those shapes back into the sand so it's not little scrubby dark marks just kind of plopped on top. So I'm taking this lighter mixture and very, very lightly just touching the bottom of these shapes. See that? And it just kind of helps say that they're part of the sand, that they're down in the sand. And any of them that you don't like, just cover them right up. Paint them out. A little bit more white, just for a couple pops. Remember, we talked about that a few times throughout this series. If your highlights aren't light enough, that means your darks aren't dark enough. You know, if you use white for your highlights, but it's not light enough, your darks aren't dark enough, and vice versa. So I'm adding this little bit of this lighter color in there because that helps kind of punch those darker colors and makes them a little bit more impactful. Back into my water shadow color, that blue-gray, mostly white here, and kind of breaking up the tip of my brush. I'm going to start with a very light touch, bringing that water onto the sand. I have a lot of paint on this brush, but notice not a lot of paint is coming off because I'm just barely touching, letting it almost dry brush over the edge of the sand. Didn't want it to be huge crashing waves, just a nice gentle break. Matte medium here would be helpful in helping you kind of keep that a little bit transparent, but not required. In fact, I don't think I'm using very much matte medium here, any more than I do typically. So I'm definitely not glazing. But if you find you're having a hard time, you might be using too much paint, or try using some matte medium to make it more transparent. Going back into the water, just experimenting there, finding what that color would do. It wasn't doing a lot, so I just picked up some white, and I'm going to kind of just burst the top edge of a couple of these little waves. Just the corner of that little bright, so that I don't get little rectangles on top of the wave. Start with a grayer blue, don't just jump straight to white, because then it'll just be a big white fuzz on top of the wave. As you can see there, the color that I've got already is just kind of the same color that I used on the ocean, and now I'm picking up some white and putting it in there, but it still has a hint of that blue-gray in there. Just touching and letting it kind of be dabby rather than a line. I have some extra water in this brush, and I just picked up white. Mr. Moon is really on one today. And I'm going to get really close to the canvas and just flick. Get some little sprays. I wasn't sure that was going to work, but I knew I could wipe it off if I got to it quickly, but I really liked the way that looked, so I went with it. Don't go too overboard with it. Let it be really subtle. I think that'll make it the most impactful. Just white. There's a little bit of matte medium. And just kind of touching up some of the little highlights in the break here. Some much thicker than others. Right there where it comes up over the edge of the sand. And just touching up the water here and there throughout. Some solid, thick white there for the brightest point of the waves. Back to that number 8 bright and just white. It's pretty thick. I'm just going to start putting in just a couple of spots in the sky here that is thick and pure white. Don't go overboard here. Just a few spots, very gently blended into everything else for a nice bright sky. Just really light touches with this pure white, breaking up the edges so it gently blends into everything else. And we've got a very subtle sky full of clouds. As always, thank you so much to my awesome sponsor, Fredericks, for providing the canvas sheets that I used in this series. It was really freeing to be able to cut these sheets to the size that I needed so that I could feel confident to just experiment and not have to worry about, wasting a large, expensive canvas. And to all of you who have hung out with me through this whole thing, thank you so much. It means the world to me, and I hope that you've learned a lot. And I hope to see you all next time.